So let me begin by saying a big thanks to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York and also the Social Justice Committee for hosting this event. I really do appreciate your time and support of this discussion. Also say hello to the folks on Zoom. Hello, out there in virtual land. And let me begin by also giving a caveat. Since I work for the federal government, I have to say this. My people at work say you must say this, and that is the views you're hearing tonight are mine and mine alone. They do not reflect the views of the federal government, of the Department of Energy, or the National Nuclear Security Administration, who I work for. So, with that, getting that out of the way, what my goal is for this short talk tonight is to give you, or create, if I can in 30 minutes, a small window for you to see into Ukraine from a different perspective. So the last 2 months we've been seeing Ukraine from a certain perspective, and that is war, it is trauma, it is destruction, it is death. It is not a pleasant window to look through. And that's what a lot of us are seeing played out on social media, on the TV screens, and through various other forms. So what my goal tonight is to give you a slightly different window, albeit a smaller window, of some of the people I work with, some of my experiences in the country, and hopefully you can take that away tonight as well. So let's see, title of my slide, it wasn't a typo. Recent past and current future. The reason I chose current future is because Ukraine's future is being played out every day. It's really being played out every day as we see. It is a literal struggle for existence. It's an existential struggle. So every day is determining what the future for Ukraine will look like. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I won't even say that I'm going to attempt to give the history of Ukraine in one slide. I'm not going to do that. It is an impossible task. I have one bullet to talk about probably close to 2,000 years of history, and that is, it is an extremely multi-century and diverse, wide and deep history in Ukraine, with a history of connections with people from Central Europe, from Eastern Europe, the Black Sea region, Russia, of course. So you've got a region that is now modern-day Ukraine that has been part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Polish Empire, the Soviet Empire, the Russian Empire. Some parts of it were part of the Swedish and Lithuanian empires. So you've got a broad and deep history in this region. A lot of it started, not really written history, but a lot of it began with the Kievan Rus back in the late 9th century, or actually late 800s. So again, broad and deep history of Ukraine. Okay, we're going to fast forward past about 2,000 years, and we're going to get to kind of the recent history, and that is the independence of Ukraine from the former Soviet Union, and that was August of 1991. So that's something I think that's important to put in context, is we have a country here in its current form that's really been its own sovereign nation for 30, 31 years. And I think what's perhaps an interesting mental exercise to go through is, well, where was the United States after 30 years of its independence in 1806? Think about us. Think about the institutions, the society, what was going on in our culture at the time, the changes, the growth. So I really think that's important to put it into the context, because Ukraine is a growing country. It's a budding democracy, and it doesn't have a long history of that, being its own country and being its own sovereign nation. Okay, a little more even current history. So there's seem to be two views of Ukraine kind of floating out there. One, I will say, again, my personal view is that it's a view that's shared by very few people, and the other view is one that's shared by many people. I'll read a quote from Vladimir Putin a few days before Russia invaded Ukraine, and speaking about Ukraine. I will start with the fact that modern Ukraine was entirely created by Russia, or to be more precise, by Bolshevik communist Russia. This process started practically right after the 1917 revolution, and Lenin and his associates did it in a way that was extremely harsh on Russia by severing what is historically Russian land. My rejoinder to that is, that's not true. That's simply not true. Again, my opinion. What I believe is the more acceptable and accepted view of Ukraine is the following quote: Ukraine cannot simply be viewed as exclusively part of Russian or Soviet space. Ukraine is a country intimately linked to Russia and the countries of Central and Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region. And that comes, I'll do a shout out to Rory. Rory is a fellow Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine. He was in the country, the Peace Corps group before I was there, so we had a year of overlap. So Rory went on to get his PhD. He's been teaching at Cambridge for, the last 10 years. He started Cambridge's Ukrainian Studies program, and I highly recommend, if you want some more information about Ukraine, its history, its culture, its arts, its literature, to check out some of his podcasts or his YouTube videos. Okay, next slide. All right, I'll give a quick little one-slide talk about Peace Corps, just to give them the plug. So Peace Corps was established by executive order by President Kennedy in 1961. Peace Corps mission is to promote world peace and friendship by fulfilling 3 goals. So 2 of the 3 goals we really work on while we're in country, and that is to help the people of the host country with the issues that they need help with, technical issues that they've asked for assistance with. The second goal is to promote a better understanding with your hosts of Americans, of American culture, of American activities. So those 2 things really get done while you're there serving in the country you're serving in. Goal 3, that's what happens when you come back. So tonight is fulfillment of goal 3. Honestly speaking, it's been quite a while since I've physically been back in Ukraine. And while there was a lot of interest in me giving some public talks and some interviews after I got back, it kind of had petered out for quite a long time. So I'm happy to be able to talk with you all again tonight about Ukraine and some of the experiences, and that really does fulfill that 3rd goal of Peace Corps. Over 240,000, Americans have served throughout the world since 1961 in the Peace Corps. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we'll drill down a little bit more into Peace Corps in Ukraine. The first volunteers arrived there. The first Peace Corps volunteers arrived in Ukraine in 1992, and over 3,400 have served. And again, keep in mind that date of independence, 1991, not long after the country became independent, when you have Americans running around to help the country move forward. So Ukraine, like all other Peace Corps countries, they put in requests to headquarters. They say, we're looking for these types of skills to help us move forward. And at the time, English language and economic development were the 2 main areas for assistance that Ukraine had asked for assistance. Those 2 areas, plus now youth development, are still active. And I should say there are, of course, no Peace Corps volunteers currently active in Ukraine. We're not, or Peace Corps is not active in Ukraine today. At the time I was there, they also asked for environmental and health development folks to support the country. Peace Corps is a 2-year commitment. It's 24 months plus 3 months of training, so all told for 27 months. It's the largest by volunteer number Peace Corps country in the world. For many years it was while I was there, and it remains so. And as I noted, there are, of course, no volunteers actively in Ukraine today. Okay, next slide. 2 years in Ukraine. So when I got in that plane, I was 23 years old. I showed up, and We had our 3 months of training in one site in Western Ukraine, and then we all got our assignments. I was there to teach English as a foreign language. That was my role. And gosh, by the end of August of 1996, I was at my site all by myself with, of course, lots of interested people. But that was 1996 to 98. And I lived in a town called Rohatin. I say town. Depends who you ask. From Rohatin, they may say it's a large village, it's a small town, it's a village. It just really depends who you'll ask. I kind of liken it to, it was in about 5,000 people. I grew up in a little town called Mount Gretna in Lebanon County. It reminds me a lot of Mount Gretna. It's kind of the geographic size of Mount Gretna, but with quite a bit more people. But still a small town, a country town in a setting very like York County. Rolling hills, deciduous trees, farmland, very beautiful setting. We have a joke in my family that Peace Corps is a family business. And so my stepmother served in Guatemala in the late 1980s. One of my 3 sisters and her husband, they served in the Philippines in the early 90s. And I took up the family business and thought I'd join up as well. So that is kind of a joke in the family that it is a bit of a family business, Ukraine and Peace Corps. People always wonder, well, you're a volunteer, so were you getting paid? Yes, we were. We got approximately $220 a month as a living allowance. Everybody got that. It was rated for where you were in the country, but my living allowance was $220 a month. No Venmo, no ATMs, no PayPal, no ease of getting money. I had to go to the bank in my little town, get out cash, and go about my business. Peace Corps also put aside what they call a living allowance, or a readjustment allowance. So that was about $200 a month. So each month that you served for your 27-month commitment, that money was put away. So when you finished Peace Corps, you had a little money in your pocket, so you didn't go back home completely destitute and knocking on mom and dad's door to say, hey, guys, can you set me up here for a while I get to look for a job here back in the States. My landlady was also paid by Peace Corps, so my board, my room was covered, and that was part of Peace Corps as well. They paid for your housing. There was a lot of work to do for teachers. There was a lot of work to do for everybody. And so again, can you imagine going kind of back into a Soviet pedagogic system of textbooks and the West is bad, capitalism is bad, everything the West does is bad. It was really difficult to do that work with not only teachers who wanted to understand Western ways and means of teaching, but also the students were very hungry now that the wall was down to understand about the West. So I have a textbook that I brought back. This was a standard textbook this was for the 10th form. And in Ukraine, they go from grades 7 to 11. I taught grades 7 to 11, so this is ages 12 to 17. You graduated in the 11th grade, and then if you went on to university, it was a 5-year program. Universities, undergraduates were 5 years. So let me read a little passage from this book, just to give you an idea of kind of what we were faced with as teachers and what the students had been looking at for many years. I can't help but laugh at this, and well, that's just kind of is what it is. So this is titled, "The Decree on Peace." On the second day of the Great October Revolution, the first decree of the young Soviet government was the Decree on Peace, proclaimed by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin at the Second All-Russia Congress of Soviets. Peace to all peoples. With these words, the first workers' and peasants' state in the world was born, a peace-loving state of working people. To all countries drawn into the World War, Soviet Russia proposed an immediate peace. Since those days, the struggle for peace has been one of the main activities of our country. We have been living in peace for over 40 years, but it is not an easy thing to preserve peace Each step in defending peace needs great effort. That is why the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is doing everything possible to provide peaceful conditions for the fulfillment of our great task, the building of a communist society in the USSR, and for the development of a world socialist system. So those books had to go. It just simply wasn't what was happening anymore. So I think speaking for all of us that were teaching English, we worked very hard to get books donated, to get textbooks donated, to get videos, to get access to Western television in our schools, so that we could open this up to say, hey, here's what's really going on in the world, guys, and here's how we teach English, and here's what English teaching is all about. I focused with the students on listening, speaking, reading, and writing in English. I was not an English teacher by training. I learned very quickly that that was probably something I would not do in the future. It was, as I'll note, the toughest job I've ever loved, but it was actually a very good experience for that, because it really did teach me, and it showed me what good teachers are. I think we can all understand when we had a good teacher, that person had certain characteristics that were just, in my mind, somewhat magical. They knew how to do their job, and they did it very well with students. So I saw that around me, and I was able to see myself and say, yeah, that's probably not me. That's probably not something that I think I'm going to be very good at. So the toughest job you ever love. You may recall this marketing campaign from Peace Corps in the mid-90s, the early 80s. You'd see it on TV or hear it on the radio. Peace Corps, it's the toughest job you'll ever love. Well, it was. It really was the toughest job I've ever loved. Or if I can say that if I've loved more than one job, is that okay? Yeah, I think so. So just a couple of things that really come to my mind for myself and seeing and working and being a part of this society was humility. One idea of this was, again, serving people that have less than you, working with people that have less, but yet who are willing and interested in giving you the shirt off their back. I saw this when I would get invited over to people's homes for dinner, for meals. They would lay out the nicest meal. They would lay out the best silverware, the best cutlery, everything. And I knew these people didn't have a lot to give, but they were very interested in showing me, hosting me, and hosting a good time, and hosting, making me feel comfortable, a certain act of humility. Growth. Here I was, 23 years old. I'm in this somewhat of a petri dish, this experiment running around Ukraine. I wasn't running around Ukraine, but that ability to have that experience as a young person was phenomenal. It was something I'll never, ever be able to get back. And it really was due in large part to the people I was with, but also the country I was in. Curiosity. Well, 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds are usually curious. I was as well. And again, it was a perfect environment to not quench that curiosity, but really fuel that curiosity. I mean, I was interacting with people at school, with people that had been under a Soviet system of education, of life, one takeaway was every person I interacted with had a relative that was sent either to the camps or had been killed in war or had had some struggle. And that's an amazing, it's amazing in hindsight to think about that. And that really was a part of the curiosity, but just learning about the people, what they're doing. Freedom. Well, again, freedom to interact with folks, freedom to travel, explore this country, to really kind of open your eyes to seeing what's going on. And with that big shift from a Soviet system for decades of how people should behave, what they could do, what they couldn't do, they were hungry too to have that freedom. So it was very enlightening. Lasting friendships, many lasting friendships with people that I served with in Ukraine, that I'm still dear and close friends with today. Lasting friendships with the people that I work with and the students. I'll get to talk about a story there in a bit. Memories and experiences. Well, again, it was something that was absolutely poignant and very important in my life. And it really, in hindsight, led me in a direction, in a career, and in a focus that I'm in today. So I really do have a lot to thank for Peace Corps and my experiences with the people there in Ukraine. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I have literally hundreds of pictures that I have, and guess what? We didn't have digital cameras back in the 90s, no surprise. So I was able to digitize all these things, not before the talk, but I did that a long time ago. Fortunately, I have these, as we say now, wet film, real film camera pictures digitized. So this is me and my landlady, Pani Hanusia. She went by Pani Nusia. So what's Pani mean? Well, the area I was in Ukraine, in western Ukraine, in this town called Rohatin, it has a Ukrainian Orthodox church, and right across the street is a Polish Catholic church. It was part of Poland. So there's a lot, again, of this mixing of people, of ethnicities, but also language. So Pan and Pani Pan is Mr. and Pani is Mrs. Well, in Ukrainian and Russian, you don't use that. You don't have a Mr. or Mrs. You use what's called a first name, a patronymic name, and a last name. So for example, I would be Greg. My father's name is James, so I would be Gregory Jamesovich Dwyer. My wife, Janelle, would be Janelle Patrikova, because her father's name is Patrick Mancuso. But you wouldn't call her a Miss or Mrs. You would refer to someone formally as your first name and your patronymic name. So Bogdan Vasilievich. That's a very formal way to talk to someone that you don't know. So Pani Nusia, wonderful landlord. She actually was living in her house, and she had moved up the street about 200 yards with her family, and that's where I was living for the first year. So such a kind person, again, exemplifies all these characteristics I've talked about: humility and curiosity, humor. One of the funniest stories, I've got lots of funny stories, but every Sunday, Pani Nusia would, at first she just burst into the door because it was her house, and why would she need to knock? Sunday, and it was always around 12:30, 1 o'clock, burst into the door and say, "Gregory, yisti, pierogi." She says, "Gregory, it's time to eat, pierogies." And to this day, I have not found a pierogi that tastes as good as the homemade pierogies from Pani Nusia. She made the dough, of course they harvested the potatoes, they processed the potatoes, and they also made the cheese that went in those pierogies. And she also made the sour cream and the milk that came with the pierogies. So it was phenomenal. She wanted to make sure that I was well fed, because a single man by himself at that age in Ukraine, that was not a right thing. There was something wrong here. So she needed to make sure that she was taking care of me, and she did take care of me very well, along with a lot of other people in the village. They really, really did. Let's go to the next slide. This saying of if a picture tells 1,000 stories, I think we've got quite a few stories here. So this is Pani Nusia at the bottom, in the foreground in the left, and this was taken during the Christmas time holidays of Christmas, November, December, January of 96, 97. So Pani Nusia came out with her pals and was out caroling. And you can see, again, every one of these faces, I think, tells an amazing story. And I, as I was putting this presentation together, I thought, man, if I could only go back in time and have an hour with each of these people, I think that would be an amazing thing to hear their stories. But you can see they've got their shapkas on, their fur hats, they've got their very nice fur coats. It was a very formal event. They were coming after church in the evening to go out and carol, and they've got their suits and ties on. Interesting thing about Ukraine is they get 2 Christmases. So you get a twofer, as they say. They celebrate on the Gregorian calendar the December 25th holiday, but they also celebrate the Julian calendar, the Orthodox Christmas, so that's January 7th. Actually, it's almost a 3fer. It's maybe a 2.5fer. So this sort of just popped into my head. So I was teaching in class the one day in the middle of December, and all of a sudden, this one of the students comes in with this beard on and with looking basically like St. Nicholas. What was St. Nicholas? So St. Nicholas came into my class to visit me because what St. Nicholas does on the 17th, 19th of December is to visit the children. And if you're good, he gives a gift. If you're bad, guess what? He had a cohort with him, which was a little devil with horns and a whip. And I said, well, what's going on here, guys? He said, well, if you're bad, the devil whips you. So a little old school way of doing things, yes. But again, another cultural story of first for me, and it really was adding fuel to that fire of curiosity in Ukraine. Next slide. There's yours truly trying to do my best at kind of the Slavic stare. So you'd see a lot of these behaviors, this kind of Slavic culture of, what's going on over here? What am I seeing? What am I doing? The car, I don't know what model it is. I believe it's some knockoff of a Mini Cooper. It is literally a car you could probably pick up with 2 people. And I don't know how anyone drove that thing, but it is a tiny, tiny car in front of a 2-story apartment complex that I will say probably looks, and it is, very similar to what you're seeing on TV, because in the Soviet system there was about 4 designs of apartment buildings, and that was throughout the Soviet Union. And that's in town. And I have my shapka on. It's the required shapka in many pictures that you'll see. Okay, next slide. So a couple takeaways. Ukraine does have a diverse, educated, and talented population. Their human capital they have a rich country. They've got resources, they've got oil, gas, they've got beautiful farmlands in the east and center part of the country. But I would say, their, I think, biggest asset is their people. Highly educated people, very diverse ethnicities, diverse languages, diverse histories, and very talented population. Courageous, proud, and resilient people. And I think if one word describes Ukrainian people, it's resilient. And it's their resilience in their history, their current history, the current situation that really strikes me very much. And for better or for worse, you're seeing that played out in this really tragic situation that they're in right now. But they're resilient in many other ways. Ukraine, one of my takeaways was really this kind of Slavic view of the world, the Slavic mentality, the Slavic stereotype, and an American stereotype. But one is, for Ukraine, there's always a tough road ahead. There's always work to be done. There's always something more we need to do to better our country, to better our living situation, our circumstances. And that's really ingrained in the people, and you see a lot of that, how they look at things. This optimism versus fatalism. That's an interesting characteristic I really started to think about after I was there for about a year. And I had the interesting part about being a young person, being out of the United States, was looking at the United States from an outsider's view and hearing other people's views of our country and really thinking about it from that perspective, stepping out of kind of the arena of America. There's this kind of Slavic idea, though, that as they say, it is sudba, it's fate. Yeah, things will happen, it's fate. We can't really control a lot of things. So there's this, for me, there was a bit of a tension between this American attitude of optimism, we can do this, we can solve this, let's get it done type of thing, bringing in this enthusiasm with sometimes a little different view of, yeah, you may not be able to do that so easily. Why not? Why can't we do this? Let's solve these problems. So I want to leave with 2 anecdotes, but before I do that, if any of you are interested in reading some modern, a very good author, Artyom Chapaye, he was just interviewed in the New Yorker last month. He's got a short story called The Ukraine. It is a play, yes, of course, on the definite article the. There's a whole reason you shouldn't use that because it's not a region, it is a country. But if you're very interested in seeing some kind of a modern Ukrainian's take on Ukraine, I highly recommend checking out Artyom. So I want to leave with two anecdotes, and these anecdotes really exemplify, in my mind, resilience. They exemplify all of those characteristics, but resilience. So the first is the teachers at my school in Rohatyn, in the gymnasia. So I showed up again in the fall of 1996, and frankly speaking, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Thank goodness I had, what we all had was a site counterpart. They didn't just throw me into this. I had a fellow English teacher, and she and her family really took me under their wing as well. And she helped me navigate the process at school, how to teach, what kids were like, etc. So 3 months into this experience, I'm getting a little more confident of what's going on. So I show up one day in the October timeframe, November timeframe, and I see these boxes in the teacher's room. And they're kind of 1 foot by 1 foot square boxes, and they're piled up. There's dozens and dozens of these boxes. So I asked one of my fellow English teachers, I say, what are all those boxes for? So some context here. At the time, Ukraine was going through some very serious economic troubles. The federal system was very, how can I say this politely, mismanaged. It was not functioning properly. But again, context is key here. But that also trickled down into kind of the regional activities, the regional, state, and local government. So these teachers got paid from the regional government. And guess what? They weren't getting paid. So guess what was in those boxes? Hats. Dozens and dozens of fur hats. And the deal was, well, the regional government doesn't have cash money to pay you all, but what they do have is they own a hat production factory. And this month, you're getting paid in hats. No kidding. So again, imagine these are teachers, these are not entrepreneurs, these are not salespeople, so resilience here is key. Well, they got paid in hats, so guess what they had to do? They had to go take those hats, they either had to sell them in the market, they had to trade them, barter them, do whatever they needed to do to get hard currency to pay the bills, to feed their families. That was that month. A month later, I showed up to the teachers, as I did every day, the teachers' room, and this time there were cases and cases of vodka. No kidding. Guess what? The regional government owns a vodka production facility, and guess what, guys? This month you're getting paid in vodka, and it's your job to go out and sell those cases of vodka to get hard currency to pay your bills. So I said to them, a couple of my fellow English teachers, I said, why do you still work? Why aren't you on strike? Because you're not getting paid. Why come to work? And for anyone growing up in the Soviet system, striking was not an option. You didn't need to strike. You were in the workers' paradise. You were getting paid. Your job was great. Why strike? There was no striking. So there was that backdrop. But the other backdrop was the pride. And the pride was, hey, if we strike, no one's going to teach our kids. No one's going to teach these kids. And it's very important to us to do that. So they did. They did not strike. They came very close to striking, but they continued to teach. And fortunately, after a few more months, the payment system got sorted out and they were actually getting paid in a hard currency. So let's go to the next slide. These are some of my co-teachers on a bit more of a pleasant outing. This was the fellow on the far left, Valery. He was one of my site counterparts. He was a fellow English teacher, super helpful mentor, teacher of me for Ukrainian. There's two teachers of mathematics and a teacher of Ukrainian language. So what they said to me was, hey, Greg, school's out, kids are gone, let's get on our bikes and go have a picnic. I said, sounds good to me. Why not? So they said, well, we got to stop at the store. So we stopped at the store, got some salted fish, a couple bottles of beer, and there was probably a bottle of vodka in there. That's a standard thing. Don't need to be alarmed. And we went out to the countryside a few miles outside of our little village and had a great picnic. But this is, again, just the joy in being. And I think it really exemplifies, again, this idea of resilience. Okay, one more anecdote to share. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a typical classroom. Yeah, in Ukraine, it's pretty bare bones. This is, let's see, this is not my class, but it was the 7th grade class I was teaching. This was in the spring of 1998. And I was fortunate to have very small classes. It was in a specialized school. These kids were fantastic. A lot of my kids, 95% of them were absolutely outstanding. These folks, these guys were no exception. At the time of this picture, they were 13-ish, 13, 14 years old. The gal third from the left in the front is named Irina. And she was a great student like all the rest. I wouldn't say she was super exceptional. They were all exceptional. Amazing students they would do their homework, they were attentive, they were polite. I thought, man, if all the kids were like this, I think I could teach. So let's fast forward to the year 2006. This is 1998. We'll fast forward to 2006. I'm in my office in Washington, D.C., and the phone rings. Pick up the phone. This is Greg Dwyer speaking. Nothing there. So I say, hello? Hello, is someone there? This tiny voice pops out, comes up. Mr. Greg? Mr. Greg? Is that you, Mr. Greg? I was referred to as Mr. Greg as the teacher. I said, yeah, this is Mr. Greg. Who's this? Mr. Greg, this is Irina, your student from Rohatyn. What? My student from Rohatyn? So I was absolutely dumbfounded. I said, Irina, how are you calling? How did you find me? I have still not found out how she got my phone number. It's not really listed in a phone book, but the resilience, she found it. So she calls me in my office in 2006 and says, well, I just wanted to tell you something. I'm here in America now, and I'm studying English this summer at Harvard. And I just wanted to call you to tell me how much you inspired me and you meant to me. So I closed the door in my office because you know what happened next. The tears just streamed out of my eyes. It was an amazing story. So I said, I'm so proud of you. You deserve all the success you have, and let's stay in touch. So by then there was social media, so we could connect on Facebook. So we stayed in touch over the years, and I get updates periodically from Irina. So after studying English at Harvard for the summer, she went back to the University at Kyiv to get her law degree. And then a few years later, I get an email, a text, a note that says, hey, Mr. Greg, I got a Fulbright scholarship to study international law at the University of Miami. So fast forward, I'm checking her out, she's following her, she's in Miami studying law, international law. She ultimately went back to Ukraine and to work on humanitarian issues. So let's go to the next slide. So 2011, there's Irina. Grown woman, beautiful person. Janelle took the picture, and this was in October of 2011. And that's now 10 years ago. What I can say today is that Irina and her family are in Poland now. They had to leave the country, and she is determining what her next steps are going to be. But again, another beautiful story of resilience and courage and conviction. I'm in touch with a lot of my students, and Irina's, again, just one of my former students, one of many. So let's go to the next slide. What can you do to help? Okay, we're all feeling the burnout. We have crisis fatigue. You pick a crisis, you name a crisis. Yes, we're all burned out. But there is something you can do for Ukraine, for the people of Ukraine. You can educate yourself. You can donate your time or money. You can get in touch with our elected officials and show your support for the people of Ukraine. Tell them that you are supporting Ukraine. You can attend a rally for Ukraine in support of Ukraine. Support Ukrainian businesses, or I'll give an unsolicited plug to Janina's, the bakery. She was nice enough to bake the cookies for us out here in the kitchen area. I just found out that she's hosting, her family in Poland is hosting Ukrainian refugees. So there's a business you can support. She also does very good coffee and croissants, by the way. So that's another, don't need to plug that. And Pam is going to come up and talk a little bit about the hosting a Ukrainian family and what we can actually do to see this come through. I just learned today, for example, my employer, the federal government, we have a combined federal campaign. They just announced today that they are going to open up a new funding mechanism to fund directly for Ukraine that will go out of our payroll deductions. But you can also ask your business, ask your employer, hey, would you be interested in donating money to the humanitarian efforts in Ukraine? Or would you be interested in matching some of your employees, financial donations? So there's much we can do. And as David noted, I'll be here, of course, afterwards, happy to answer questions after the presentation, but I will be here to chat if you'd like to grab me afterwards. So just a couple closing thoughts. Let's go to the next slide. So you've probably heard, maybe you have, this saying, Slava Ukrainie, Geroyam Slava. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. I put down the Ukrainian national anthem. The reason I did that, of course, it again adds to this struggle. If you read the words of this anthem, it is an anthem of struggle, of grit and determination, of resilience. And what I'll say is when we were, the anthem was being written, all these ideas and symbols of the state were being really formulated in those early years. And if you literally translate the words of the first sentence of the anthem, my Peace Corps friends and I were like, this is kind of morose. It literally translates as, Ukraine is not yet dead. Now, it doesn't mean that, of course. That's a literal translation. But Ukraine's glory has not yet died, nor her freedom. So the last piece I'll leave you with perhaps is a bit dark. I didn't intend it to be dark, but I think it's something that, again, to put this into context and perspective. And it's a line from the miniseries Chernobyl that was on HBO a couple of years ago. And I thought it was pretty apropos to Putin's Orwellian Russia today. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt must be paid. So I want to thank you very much for your attention. As I mentioned, I'll be here afterwards. We'll be here for some Q&A. And I think, Pam, you're next up. So Pam, over to you.
Okay, so what can we do? How can we be involved in hosting a family from Ukraine? Carol has generously volunteered me to lead this effort. It's new for me. I've typically been more of an Indian than a chief, but I'm happy to. I needed more to do in life, and I'm happy to take on this project. So it's very exciting. Many of you know about Cho. have not been part of your congregation, so I've learned about him through Carol and found that story to be extremely inspiring. And excited, if we can do something like that for a Ukrainian family. I just think it'll be an amazing and wonderful experience for all of us, and hopefully for the Ukrainian family as well. So just a little about me. Moved to York County together with my husband back in 2007 to purchase the Jackson House Bed and Breakfast down in Railroad. We ran that for 12 years. Sold it 2019. During that time, I got involved politically. I'm the committee woman for the Springfield Township Precinct, Democratic committee woman. I'm active with the York County Federation of Democratic Women. I ran for office, ran for Register of Wills back in 2019. Needless to say, I was not elected, but it was a great experience. Met Carol then, met Steve Snell, met a lot of people in York County, and really the experience was tremendous. My husband and I have a food concession at the Maryland Renaissance Festival down near Annapolis and Crownsville, so we do that every year for 9 straight weekends, and we've got a little bit of an entrepreneurial, spirit between us. We've rehabbed houses and stuff like that now. I'm mostly retired. we have a place that we bought on Kent Island because the grandkids are down there, so we're dividing our time between York County and Kent Island. So 3 grands, 1 on the way, and so it's a good life. A couple of weeks ago, I agreed to lead the effort to welcome and support a family from Ukraine whenever one does emerge, and that might be a little while, which is a good thing because we have some things to do to get ready. The goal here is to put together a team. It takes a village, and one of the biggest thing, the hardest thing typically in doing something like this is, especially with the housing market the way it is where are these folks going to live? Well, guess what? We have an incredibly generous member of this congregation who has offered to share his big, beautiful home and farm with a family. And it just needs a little bit of sprucing up and good to go. So that's a very, very exciting piece of the puzzle that's already in place. But what will be needed is things like transportation for the family to and from wherever they need to go, setting up school for presuming there are children for them, setting up health care, getting kids, like I said, registered for school, getting driver's licenses. We think that our government is going to make it tremendously easier to have all of those things happen for Ukrainians. Because it's going to be easier, presumably, to get a work permit, to get health care. So we're hoping that will be less complicated than it would be, say, for a family from Mexico or something. So we're going to. A lot of people have expressed interest already. I've been sending this group email out to 15 of us or something. I've communicated with Church World Services, so I gather that this work is done through this church and many other churches through an organization called Church World Services. So I called Dwyer Sharif, is her name. She heads up the Harrisburg office of Church World Services, which is new. The Lancaster office has been in place for a while. Harrisburg has sort of just been opened. So she said, we're very excited that we've offered to form a team, especially, that our team, that we've already got potential housing in place. She had originally asked if we could do, she said, well, it's going to be some time before we get a Ukrainian family, so how about you help us with fundraising? I could see her get those wheels turning. So originally she asked for baked goods, and in fact a couple of you said, oh yeah, sure, I'll bake stuff, and then she came back and said, no, we can't do baked goods because they won't allow that. So she came up actually with the idea of doing these mason jar, you put all the dry goods in there with the recipe, and the person just has to get some eggs and milk and whatever else it is involved. So it looks like, we'll get more into that in a little bit. Fundraising end, but then also her boss, whose name is Alex Swan, says, thanks so much for starting this important conversation. We're thrilled and thankful for your support. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of unknowns about when we might be receiving Ukrainian families, as details continue to be fleshed out after the Biden administration announced the U.S. would be accepting 100,000 Ukrainians. Fortunately, Pennsylvania has a long history of welcoming Ukrainians, so I suspect several arrivals will be coming to our beautiful state. I will continue to provide updates as I hear them. Please let me know if you have any questions. But that's good, so it'll be a couple months. Fine. So we'll have plenty of time to help get the physical house in order, to get some money raised, to put a team together. We also need to, each of us that's going to be working with children potentially has to get okayed through the Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI and all of that. So the first step in all of that is to, we've got to go to, there's no specific website yet for Church World Services Harrisburg. So it's very simple, actually. You go, and I will send out, for anyone who signs up on David's sign-up sheet, I've already got a bunch of you, your names and email addresses, at least, that I've been communicating with. I will add whatever names I don't have from David's list to that, and I'll communicate all of this to you via email as well. But what you do is you go to cwslancaster.org, get signed up. There's a whole, you just go to, get involved, and then it says volunteer, and then it's some information for you to fill out, and they will then let us know next steps as far as how to get fingerprinted and all those kind of things, so that we're okay to work with children. So with respect to this fundraiser, I thought, why not? I mean, if these mason jars come in a you could buy a dozen of them for $5 or something, $6, I don't know what they cost, but I found a recipe for Ukrainian apple cake. I made one, it's out there, so afterward, hopefully, everybody can partake. But just put the dry goods in a mason jar. I've made up a little mock-up. We'll have a nice thing printed, Ukrainian flag on one side, recipe, and instructions on the other side. Art Fest is happening in Harrisburg on the 28th of May. So she would like, Dure Sharif would like to be able to sell these to raise money for Ukrainian refugees for Church World Services on the 28th at that event from 10 to 6. I thought, if, 10 of us do 12 of them, that's 120 times we were discussing a price of like $10. Hey, that's $1,200. If that goes well, we could do something, use the same product and keep at it for events in York. I found out when I ran for office, there are events constantly in York where you can, set up shop and sell stuff or whatever, and people are dying to support anything to do with the situation in Ukraine. It might be a good way for us to continue to raise money. So, what else? So what we're going to do is, get a team together. The other thing that's going to need to happen besides this immediate, fundraiser idea is, besides getting everyone registered with Church World Services and getting the proper paperwork, going so that we can, we'll all be in place, is, getting George's home organized and ready for folks. So, that's I don't know how we want to do that or how George wants to do it, but it, maybe one day a week and maybe one room at a time. And we discussed a Connex box. Maybe he's got a lot of beautiful old treasures and some other stuff that just needs to, to go. But it's very doable. To me, this place looks great. I'm used to a husband that has, 2 giant garages full of that you can't even walk around in, and so I don't think George's place, is all that overwhelming. I think it's beautiful and a great location, and 100 acres of a pond, and it's just a lovely spot. So we're really lucky there. And that's about all I've got. Does anybody have any, and this, can be a discussion, questions for me, considerations, ideas, other, issues for Greg with respect to the situation in Ukraine. How, what do we want to talk about here? Yes?
When we supported the show, we have money donate like a monthly basis. Would that be set up to do the same capacity?
I think we can do that. Is that enough?
We expect to do that. I'm not sure what the status exactly of the Cho account is, but we expect to do that one way or another. And by the way, there are donation baskets that are around here, that are outside, so anything that goes into there, it will go into that account, whether it's a new account or the old one just transferred over to the benefit of a Ukrainian family.
There you go. Anything else?
There was one, I'll just read the question. It came in on Zoom, and it was this. One thought for Greg, and by the way, this came in early in his presentation. One thought for Greg to share might be to personalize a bit his connection to Ukraine. Did he choose Ukraine as a Peace Corps site? What does he hope for, and follow up from those of us in the audience? So, Greg, you could answer that part easily.
I did not choose Ukraine. Ukraine was chosen for me. And kind of how it worked at the time was for Peace Corps, and I believe it's still the case, you can't choose the country you want to serve in. You can choose a region. You can say, and Peace Corps is divided, I think now into like there's Africa, Asia, Europe, and maybe another region. But at the time it was Eastern Europe because there was a lot of Peace Corps activity in Eastern Europe. Poland, Czech Republic, Kazakhstan, that's Central Asia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Romania, they all had Peace Corps activity going on. So I did a stint, a year abroad in undergrad in the UK, and I traveled over to Prague, and gosh, that was 1993, and I thought, man, this is a really cool place. There's a lot of weird stuff going on here. This looks like a neat place to be. So I chose that region. I chose the region of Eastern Europe, and I got my letter, and it said, we'd like you to go to Ukraine. I said, sign me up. Sounds good. So yeah, it was not my choice, but that's how it played out.
I think one of the things that people probably wonder is whether you speak Ukrainian.
Yes, and I speak Russian. My Russian is much better than my Ukrainian, and sort of, here's why. I was not formally trained in Ukrainian. We had 3 months of language study and pedagogic study while we were in country. So it was really just enough Ukrainian to get by, to order food, to get on the right bus, to tell time, to say I'm lost, help me, those types of things. And we did have language support at our site. We were able to pay a tutor. I paid a tutor to teach me Ukrainian. Now, in the eastern part of the country, where really things are happening now, it's traditionally been Russian speaking. So we had people that were then trained in Russia that were going to serve in the eastern part of the country. So I knew some Ukrainian. Having finished my Peace Corps service, I came back, went to graduate school, and part of my graduate program was Russian language. Well, my Russian teachers, and again, this kind of is not surprising to me, learning Russian at a graduate level, and when I would forget or I didn't know the Russian word for something, I would use a Ukrainian word. Well, that was a big no-no for my Russian teachers, and they would say, Grisha, which is my diminutive name in Russian, Gregory, but Grisha, if you don't know the Russian word, don't use that peasant language. Use just the English word. Yeah, so my Russian is much better than my Ukrainian, but fortunately my Ukrainian friends do not hold that against me.
The question is whether, given his height, given that he's working in the area of nuclear deproliferation, can he speak to the issue that's going on right now between Russia and Ukraine?
Sure. Again, and just to reiterate this, these are my views. They're not the views of anyone else. Honestly speaking, when February 24th hit, it was a kind of a combination of tragedy in my personal life and my professional life. I have been working with Russia, doing Russia programs for almost 20 years, traveling to Russia, working in nuclear facilities, working with Russian government officials. I was part of the New START Treaty negotiating team back in 2009, 2010 timeframe. So my work is heavily focused on Russia, strategic stability dialogues with Russia. We just had 2 of those. The last one was in September in Geneva. So my professional world just kind of went haywire. Here are people that we're working with, and this is happening. We're not having those discussions anymore with the Russians. We are certainly doing other things in that world, but it really turned that world upside down. And it is very troubling to me when you have a nuclear power, Russia, saber rattling, making threats to potentially use nuclear weapons. This is very disturbing to me personally, and it's very disturbing to a lot of people in and outside of government, because this is some uncharted territory. Here we've had relatively speaking, peaceful times since the end of World War II, and My concern, I'll just throw it out there, is the escalation. Now we're seeing this escalation. Now Russia's turning off the gas and oil taps, the gas taps to Poland and Bulgaria. What happens next? And where does that escalation stop? So it's very concerning to me, and it is very troubling to me, Carol. It has not been an easy 2 months for many of us that are intimately tied to Russia and intimately tied to Ukraine. I just get the double whammy for what I do. Paul?
David, the area of Ukraine and Baltic Sea and has been a hotbed for centuries and millennia because of the Ottoman Empire and the Christian Empire, and the way that conquering countries like to divide up the spoils. And is Ukraine the result of some of that division? And how is that affecting the current situation?
Paul, that is not an easy question to answer. And I'll just caveat that by saying I'm not a history expert on Ukraine. I, of course, know the region and understand it. I think there is some of that. I mean, again, this mention I made of Ukraine, or that whole region being part of the Polish Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Lithuanian Empire, the Swedish, on and on. So I think it's perhaps best to not think of it in an ethnicity perspective. And some of the wars or internal flare-ups we've had in perhaps like former Yugoslavia, it was largely very ethnic-based. Ukraine, to me, again, my personal view is it's not so ethnic-based. There's a lot of different ethnicities in Ukraine. There's a lot of different linguistic traditions in Ukraine. Polish, you've got Poland, Bulgaria, Moldova, Hungary, Belarus, Russia. You've got the whole Black Sea region, which is largely connected to Turkey. You've got all this happening. And one can, that's an argument I think the Russian government makes to justify what they're doing. They say, hey, Ukraine really shouldn't exist. It's not really a country. Well, that's bunk. That's really bunk. But that makes an easy justification for what they're doing. Ukraine does have a right to exist, and it does have a rich history. And yes, there are all those ethnicities, but Hungarians are living, they're doing their activities. The Poles are, the Baltic states are, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the history you can't ignore. But how much that plays into the current situation, it depends who you ask. And I think most people will say, as Professor Finnan says, that it's not so simple to say it's just a little stepchild or little brother of Russia. It's not that simple. It really isn't. Good question. Mm-hmm.
For those on Zoom, there were two questions, and the first one is, where is the nearest Ukrainian community in this area, and also where's the nearest Ukrainian church?
Very good question. So we're lucky in York that we have Baltimore. Baltimore has a pretty thriving Ukrainian community. They have several Ukrainian Orthodox churches. There is a lively community in Baltimore. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing for us in York that are thinking about hosting a family and want to support a family, that resource is there. And George, Paul, that also answers your question a bit. There are, that I'm aware of in Baltimore. Farther we go west, Pittsburgh has a thriving Ukrainian, Polish community. You can get good pierogies there, not as good as Petinousia's, but you can get good pierogies in Pittsburgh. But yeah, so that's farther afield. But I certainly, when Pam and others were stepping up, first thing that came to my mind was, hey, we've got some resources in Baltimore, and there are lots of Ukrainian folks there in Baltimore.
I have another question. You talked about your connections with different people. Are any of those people that are potentials that we could bring to York?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps. And yes, we should probably talk offline about that. But yeah, potentially. Okay. Certainly. If you've got a party coming up, I'm sure I can recommend a few fine Ukrainian vodkas. But yeah, I think probably the easiest is to find local, again, people that the opportunities are endless. I think you've got Etsy, you've got all sorts of opportunities online to support Ukrainian businesses doing handicrafts or doing some of the embroidery that I'm wearing tonight, this vyshyvanka, which is a traditional Ukrainian shirt there's a Vyshyvanka Day in May that everyone wears their traditional shirt. I will be wearing my traditional shirt that day.
Nice.
But there's beautiful, for example, arts and crafts, the eggs that you get for Easter, they're called pisanki, beautiful handicrafts, beautiful embroidery, all sorts of things that you can find online to support in the United States. That's probably the easiest, but it might be a little more difficult to find folks in Ukraine with the situation, but not impossible.
With no other questions, I want to thank our speakers tonight. It's been very enlightening for all of us. Thank you for all of you who've signed up here in the offer to help, and we will be in touch with you before very long. In the meantime, Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.